Greetings brothers, welcome to the weekly tactics video, and today I want to tell you the story of my journey from around a 50% win rate when I returned to Warhammer 40,000 in the middle of 8th edition up to where I stand now, which is basically between 85 and 90% wins on Blood Angels against very meta lists and armies. So let's dive right in. So today I want to talk about Blood Angels as a whole and talk about like key strategies and things you can think about as opposed to maybe individual army lists or units. Now on this channel I've obviously done a ton of videos about them, and if you stay to the very end then I'll link you to my tactics playlist and you can get all the information on the different units that you may want to check out. So I'd like to start today with a very simple question: who are the Blood Angels? And my answer would be, first and foremost, we're Space Marines, and Blood Angels is the second part of that. To make our army strong, we should pull on both aspects. Strong, reliable firepower, which is generally what Marines are known for, with a reasonable, decent armor save, and then the speed and conviction of a fast-moving, melee Blood Angels attack wing. So when I'm building my army lists, I prefer to think of it in this manner, and it is certainly possible to build full melee army lists with Blood Angels in the past, and it has also been shown to be possible in this edition. However, my win rate skyrocketed when I started using this approach. So for me, it's very easy to do. 25 to 30%, so around 500 points in a 2k list, I am trying to build including reliable ranged firepower. Now, typically you would think of this as heavy support, but in the current edition, it's kind of very much elite-based dreadnought choices that are the strongest, so I'm trying to include some of these, and the main reason to include this strong element of reliable firepower is, if left unchecked, this will win you the game, giving your opponent a very difficult choice, and sometimes we talk about this choice as threat overload. So the threats, when people play against Blood Angels, they're going to be looking for those fast-moving, punchy melee units, and they're going to be trying to focus them down. If they do this, then your reliable firepower will systematically, every turn, wipe out models off the board and win you the game. And vice versa, if they go after all your firepower, then great. They've left your melee wing to do what it does best and move around the board very quickly and destroy the enemy. And this is a tactic, or this is the strategy that I like to bring to every battle now, and it has really seen my win rate skyrocket. As mentioned, when I first came back to the hobby, so I came back to the hobby at the very beginning of 8th edition. I was out for probably 3 editions, maybe from 4th to 8th, and when I came back, there was definitely a saying that went around for Blood Angels, and that was always be charging. ABC, simple as that. And it's a very common phrase, and it's still used to this day, and people will still advise you to win games by always be charging. Now, if the terrain is on your side and you're playing on a very dense board, this can definitely be true, but sometimes you'll go to a tournament and you'll see 4 pieces of obscuring terrain on the board. If you are going to end up in a situation like that, and it is known and it is possible that that will happen. So when you're playing Warhammer with your friends or at a tournament, sometimes the terrain can be very light, and a melee army is going to struggle a lot against heavy shooting threats on a light board. And when I was playing against my friends, I definitely found this, we weren't even playing on super light boards, but I definitely thought I was a better player than a 50% win rate player, and I was struggling against loads of different armies to consistently bring home the wins, and there was an element of luck in all my games, and I didn't feel that I was happy with this, element of luck. There is an element of luck because you roll a lot of dice, but I definitely felt like I was a higher than a 50% win rate player, and I was very frustrated that I couldn't figure out how to improve. And I think at this point I was running loads of characters, Death Companies, Sanguinary Guard, Vanguard Veterans, all fast moving, all around the Wrath of Baal, getting those 14-inch jumps across the board, and in some shooting phases I could easily see myself lose 2 or 3 units worth 200 or 300 points in a single turn. I remember a game against Andrew's Iron Hands, and you guys know that I play Andrew a lot. Typically our games now with Andrew are very, very close. I usually manage to bring home the W, but at that time, I remember a single game where I believe his Iron Hands list shot around 1100 points of my army off the board in a single turn. This was very early in the game. I don't even think I'd made a single charge at this point, and the game was effectively over. Andrew being a good sport at that time, we reset the game and we carried on, but yeah, it just felt like I was pigeonholed. There was only one thing I could do, which was always be charging. We know that charges from Deep Strike are unreliable. There is a great slide that I will put on the screen that shows you the charge percentages from Deep Strike. So if you're doing multiple Deep Strikes, even with ways of getting rerolls and that, Deep Strikes are still unreliable. You do not want to be relying on Deep Strikes to win the game. Yes, it works for you sometimes, but then you're pushing yourself into that very luck-based approach, which is not an approach that I really endorse. I want to win the game using my skill, using my strategy, and using my tactics. And that is where this balanced approach, I believe, comes into its own. So halfway through 8th edition, Blood Angel's got a power spike with Savage Echoes. However, Savage Echoes really requires you to be in turn 3 or beyond to take advantage of it. You get an additional attack once you're in the Salt Doctrine. And if you think of a unit like Sanguinary Guard, who get 4 attacks on the charge, now this gives them an extra basically 25% damage, right? Because they go from 4 to 5 attacks. If a model had less than 3 attacks, let's say a Vanguard Veteran with a Thunderhammer, then you get even more of a bonus. So arguably, there's a huge power spike in turn 3 for Blood Angels. And sometimes what this means is it's actually okay to be behind in turn 1 and 2 in terms of like how many primaries you're scoring, how many enemy units you are killing, because if you can keep all your units alive or your key units alive until turn 3 to make those turn 3 charges, they will be devastating. Now there is some other rules you can use, like the Blood Chalice, to get a single unit into Assault Doctrine earlier, but if you are getting multiple units into that Savage Echoes bracket in turn 3, and you force the enemy to maybe use a bunch of their CP early in the game so they don't have enough CP for counter or interrupt, you can basically win the game in turn 3 if you've got like 4 or 5 of your different units charged in. So my tactic then would be to be cagey in turn 1 and turn 2. We can fall behind, that's fine, because we know we're going to make up points in turns 3 through 5. We can give up maybe 1 or 2 objectives in the early game as well, if we're not sure we can contest them and keep those units alive. And we can also maybe trick our opponent. You know, start a unit of models on the board, and then upon Wings of Fire them straight away in turn 1, pull a unit back off the board after deployment, and sort of keep your opponent guessing. I deploy very cagey, trying to deploy everything out with line of sight. Definitely my strong units like Sanguinary Guard will always deploy into cover in an obscuring position, and usually all I will do maybe in the first turn or first 2 with the Sanguinary Guard, for example, is to try and move into another obscuring position a little bit further ahead on the board. One of the kind channel members, Highland Phoenix, I'm sure if you're watching this video you've seen him in our chat, has coined the phrase, it's no longer ABC, it's now BAC, and that is a very flattering phrase, and what he means by that is the Blood Angels Commander style of play, where we're gonna know that we are gonna do a lot of damage in turn 3, so the goal is to get into turn 3, set up for making charges, and with as many of our models alive as possible. Since I have made this change, I went from a very middle of the road out. Let's say I played 50 games in 8th edition, and if I was lucky, I was on a 50% win rate. I think more realistically it was probably 45. I lost slightly more than I won. In 9th edition, I have since then gone on to about 80 or 90% win rate. I have done multiple 10 plus win streaks on this channel. We're on another massive win streak on the channel right now, and we've been playing against like the super meta Orc Buggies list, the Speedwag that is bonkers broken, but we're still able to beat it with this very, very cagey turn 1 and 2. And let's move on and let's talk more about how I can take arguably a non-meta army, which are Blood Angels right now, and make win after win after win. So when we talk about playing cagey, what are the things I'm going to do? Well, one is going to be a little bit about deployment. I'm going to deploy my MVP units behind any obscuring cover that I can in my deployment zone, and I'm going to make sure that any of my big firing units are going to be able to get firing arcs across good parts of the board in turn 1. I'm also going to do some homework here, and I'm going to know the nastiest enemies in the army lists if I possibly can, right? Sometimes you're going to come up against an enemy that you don't know much about. That's definitely going to happen. But if I do know, I'm going to try and figure out what I need to get rid of, what I need to kill, and why. I also try and use any range that I have against the enemy. For example, Volkite Contemptors, which I run at the moment, have 45-inch range. A lot of enemy firepower might be 36 inches, so we deploy the Volkites as far back, remembering that they can also move 8. So essentially, knowing my threat range. So I know I deploy my Volkite, it moves 8, it shoots 45, so I have a 53-inch threat range. If my enemy does not have as much threat range, then I can deploy my units very, very safely. I'm also going to really consider about biding my time to make myself into turn 3. And what I mean by that is, when I was at the tournament just recently, Clan Wars, there was an objective that I really wanted to sit on in turn 2, or at the end of turn 1, to get those primary points at the beginning of turn 2. However, if I moved on to that objective, the enemy would have been able to move 6 towards me, make a nice easy 8-inch charge. So I opted to stay off that objective. Now what that meant is, usually your Blood Angels models are quicker, so if he can move 6 and make a nice easy 8-inch charge, then that means I can usually move 12 and make an even easier 4-inch charge, right? So I decided to give up an objective in the early game, which meant by giving up the objective, he didn't have anything that could shoot at me on that side of the board. It was just another melee threat. So I gave up the objective, I gave up 5 points, but I kept my Chaplain and my Vanguard Veterans at full health, and then gave them the option to then make the charge and do the fighting in my turn. And obviously when you charge, you fight first. So kind of almost like baiting the enemy, saying, I know I have to give up these points now, but it means when we come to fight, I feel like I'm going to be in a much better position to fight you. You'll see this if you watch games on my channel, and I've done it multiple times where I've been willing to give up an objective in the very first turn if it means my whole unit will survive. Like maybe the objective is just off a piece of cover, but I don't want to lose that unit to firepower while they sit in the open field on the objective in turn 1. I'd much rather wait, get another round of shooting at the enemy, get some more threats across the board that they can deal with, and then put my unit much more safely on the objective. And I've been behind in multiple games by multiple points, and I think there is a fine line to doing this. You're going to need to play Blood Angels a lot, you're going to need to learn, and you're going to need to do experience, but it's definitely worth something to consider. If I've just told you that we get 25 to 30% stronger in turn 3, then is giving up 5 points early in the game going to be a game changer for the entire battle? And I think this leads into just knowing how to play a melee army, or an army that is very, very strong in melee. There is that need, I think, to get across the board and make those charges and feel like you are doing really well on your charges and you're making points. And I've come up against enemies that have almost like felt the need for making the charges, and if they don't make the charges, they lose the game. This is why I want you to consider the balanced approach. If I can win 85 to 90% of my games using the balanced approach. So this comes down to knowing how to play a melee army, but using the balanced nature of it to accelerate and keep your army going. So if you can't make those key charges early in the game, but that's not a problem, because we know we're going to get stronger, and your balanced section of your list is going to keep you in the game. I played at Clan Wars, and I'll link a video up above where I break down all my games at Clan Wars. But in my first game, I played against Thousand Sons and Demons of Nurgle, and this was played by the captain of Team Scotland, who is actually the best player in the rankings throughout the year of 2021 in Scotland. And I beat him by about 30 points, and in that very game I actually gave up a primary objective by sitting my units in an obscuring position behind it in turn 1, because I felt like not losing my units in turn 1 was going to benefit me down the line, and I actually ended up scoring 91 points, and like I said, it was a very good win for me. I was very pleased about it. My first tournament in a few years, and it gave me great confidence to push on. But I think that just shows the strength of the BAC way of playing Blood Angels, and it's something that if you aren't doing, I would love it if you would try and tell me if your win rate goes up. So while doing this though, there's a lot of learning and repetition required, I feel like, especially if you are ever going to give up those points in the early game. I've done it multiple times, maybe a year and a half ago now, where I would give up points early, against maybe like a giant Necron blob that I felt like I couldn't survive up against the shooting, and basically I didn't want to even try because I felt like it would shoot me off the table, and then I've not been able to swing the points back later in the game. So there is definitely a bit of learning and a bit of experience required, and I do think it's very important also to do your homework and know the other armies. And occasionally on this channel I will do videos about the other armies. I did one against Death Guard a few weeks ago, and if you want to know about how Blood Angels beat other armies as well, leave me a comment down below and I'll get into that. So you have to have experience with this list, and you have to play it. You have to have the balance. You have to know to bide your time. And then finally, I think you have to have your focus. Now, I talked about this just a few weeks ago where I talked about it as like a game plan. Your list needs to be designed with a game plan in mind. And the game plan needs to include scoring primaries and secondaries, because that's how you win 9th edition. You don't need to kill a single unit. If you score all your primaries and score all your secondaries, you will win the game. So your list needs to have a focus. It needs to have multiple secondaries it's going to do well. It needs to be durable enough to either contest or hold primaries. So there's quite a lot to take in, but for me it's definitely taken me up from 45-50% win rate to 85-90. It has been super reliable. Yes, there's still some armies that are going to be very difficult for us to beat, but I don't think it's impossible. What I'd love for you to do is, if you got any value out of this video, hit the like button. If you're new here, you want more Blood Angels content every week, consider subscribing. I'm going to put my link to my tactics playlist as promised up here, and we've got videos on just about everything Blood Angels related on this channel. If that's something you want to get better at and win more games, then any of these videos would be very good for you to watch. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope to catch you guys all in the next video. By the blood are we made strong, brothers.